Hello, and welcome to the program. This is the Black Ponderer. I'm Neil Trotter, the host of this YouTube channel. We do philosophy, specifically talk about philosophical texts, where I read quotes from philosophical texts and give supplementary commentary to encourage philosophical discussion. And we also sometimes will just talk about philosophical themes on live streams and such. It's a lot of fun. That's what we do here on this channel. And today, just like the last video, we are in the office space here because I just moved and there's a lot of garage stuff. It's a lot of garage stuff because this damn shit hasn't arrived yet that I ordered. It's supposed to be coming today, but I'm waiting. We'll see. Anyway, that's why it's kind of a mess, and you'll have to forgive me if you're like, oh, this video is not very aesthetically pleasing. It's alright, it is what it is. But today, inside baseball, today we are going to be talking about some Lenin. We're going to be talking about his text here called "What Is to Be Done," and I'm doing this to make a thumbnail because I printed it, because this is a free text. Copyright expired, so you can just download it for free. And yeah, so we're going to be talking about some Lenin's work, What Is to Be Done, Vladimir Lenin. Now, am I a Leninist or a Marxist-Leninist? I would say no. I don't subscribe to that specific flavor of communist, socialist, political philosophy. Do I agree with Lenin on many matters that he talked about? Not really. Do I vibe with the way he governed or ruled? No. Right? Does he have some good points that we will discuss in this video? Yes. Yeah. I work with Marxist-Leninists and activist groups. I'm actually part of a book club that's run by Marxist-Leninists, and we read Marxist-Leninist texts, right? And I like doing that. I like reading about books that I don't necessarily agree with 100% or maybe even 50% because, it's a learning experience. You get to learn where people are coming from. And then when you get into critical discussions with people about disagreements, you can have that common foundation of, okay, well, we both read what you're talking about, or we are both familiar with the foundations of your argument, so we can share citations. I know where you're coming from, but I still disagree, such and such, so on and so forth. I like doing that, so that's why I'm making a video about this text, because there was one of the texts in the book club that I'm currently in. Is this text, What Is to Be Done, a great philosophical masterwork? I would say no. I would say no, but again, I'm going to bring up some good points that were brought up in the text. Many texts are like that. They're good and they're bad, and so you gotta, kind of disregard or, acknowledge the bad and be like, okay, all this is, I don't know about all this, but you got some good points here, so let's incorporate those good points. Honestly, a lot of the book was just Lenin just ranting and like name dropping, right? And so like if you're not familiar with a lot of Russian history, you're gonna be like, what the hell are you talking about? He's like dissing all these people, and you really gotta kind of do your research and figure out like, oh, okay, he's dissing these people, and he's dissing that newspaper. It's very much like a Twitter back and forth rant, like back in those days, kind of like I can only imagine if he was online today and how he would just be like dissing all these people online. I mean, that's very much how this is written. But, I'm gonna go ahead and read you some quotes that are actually pretty good points. I think they're pretty good points because they offer kind of an understanding of like where Marxist-Leninists are coming from. And so will give us a deeper understanding of this kind of political philosophy. So this edition is from the Marxist Internet Archive. It's produced by Chris Russell, okay, just to give you like where it's coming from. So you can go to Marxist.org and print it out. And so I'm going to be using those page numbers. and transcription by Tim Delaney. So this is page 33, section 3.1. Okay, and this is the last sentence of the first paragraph here. Even in the most advanced countries of Europe, it can still be seen that the exposure of abuses in some backward trade or in some forgotten branch of domestic industry serves as a starting point for the awakening of class consciousness, for the beginning of a trade union struggle, and for the spread of socialism. So that's true today. The advanced countries, and quote unquote advanced, the countries where capitalism is booming, right? You still got the abuse sector, the 99%, if you will, the dwindling middle class, right, or the lower middle social economic class that's kind of struggling to pay their bills, right? You got those people. You can reach out to those people and you can begin to try and raise their class consciousness. And that's a big word, or a big phrase, class consciousness. And we're going to be talking about that. And here's the next page, 34. This is the second paragraph. The question arises, what should political education consist in? We're raising the class consciousness, so political education. Can it be confirmed to the propaganda of working class hostility to the autocracy? Of course not. It is not enough to explain to the workers that they are politically oppressed. That's kind of true, right? It's not enough to say, look, you are politically oppressed by, if I can use modern day lingo, and I'm an American in the United States of America, so you hear all the time is, these Republicans, they're doing this, and it's horrible. These Democrats are doing this, and that's bad. Or this corporate elites, they're doing, and people are like, well, I know that already. I understand that. I'm living it. Tell me something new, right? But let me continue up with the text. Any more than it is to explain to them that their interests are antagonistic to the interests of the employers. Agitation must be conducted with regard to every concrete example of this oppression, as we have begun to carry on agitation around concrete examples of economic oppression. Okay, inasmuch as this oppression affects the most diverse classes of society, inasmuch as it manifests itself in the most varied spheres of life and activity, vocational, civic, personal, family, religious, scientific, etc., etc. It is not evident that we shall not be fulfilling our tasks of developing the political consciousness of the workers if we do not undertake the organization of the political exposure of the autocracy in all its aspects. In order to carry on agitation around concrete instances of oppression, these instances must be exposed, as it is necessary to expose factory abuses in order to carry on economic agitation. So what we're talking about here, well, Lenin's saying like it's not just about economic oppression. You got to think about all the other aspects. People are getting oppressed civically, they're getting oppressed personally. Their families are being attacked, right? Family life, religious, even scientific. You got to start really thinking multifaceted about the ways people are oppressed. And that's what speaks to people, right? And that's the way to raise class consciousness. It's like, you're struggling to pay your bills, and these corporate people are just, they don't care about that. And the working class is like, yeah, I know, but that's just the way life is. This is the example you get. That's just, the way society functions, and it just sucks. But if you get deeper into it, like, well, hold on a minute, like, there's specific ways that this oppression is happening, right? If we think about it in terms of like family life, or your personal life, or your civic life, or your religious life, or when we talk about scientific, then the lack of advancing technology to develop technologically. In that way, you start to enlighten people, or get through people, or raise class consciousness. But I'll continue here. One might think this to be clear enough. It turns out, however, that it is only in words that all are agreed on the need to develop political consciousness in all its aspects. So, he's saying like, duh, like what I just said, like you're supposed to tell people the multiple ways you're being oppressed. And, people who are trying to raise class consciousness or trying to speak to the masses to fight the system, they're like, well, duh, right? That's what I'm doing. But you're not doing that, are you? Your message is very limited. And that's why you're not getting through, right? And this is Lenin's argument. It's like, look, the message, the way we're trying to appeal to the masses so that we can fight this system is not working because we're limited in our messaging. We're not like really thinking deeply about the multiple ways the working class is getting oppressed. And this is page 35. This is the 5th line here. The economic struggle is the most widely applicable means of drawing the masses into active political struggle, right? That's quote unquote, right? And that's the common notion, like, oh, if we appeal to them economically, if we just make it about money, then everybody's gonna hop on board. But what Lenin is saying is, no, right? You gotta like think about other ways of oppression. Then people will start hopping on board. Then people will get out of that mode of like, well, life sucks, and then you die. It's like, well, life is drudgery. What are you gonna do? But if you get out of the economics and start getting to the other ways people are being oppressed, in that way, then you'll start inspiring people to rise up. And I thought that was a pretty good idea because I'm all for that. Getting people to think deeply about the situations that they're in. I do think like that does inspire people. When you allow people the ability to think deeply about how they're being oppressed or wronged or exploited or whatever, if they get out of the whole like superficial, one-dimensional way of how it's happening, that empowers people when people start like really getting knowledgeable about what's actually going on. It's like, I actually can do something because you know more. Knowledge is power, right? And now I'm going to start on page 42, and this is actually the last line here, the end of the last line. Those who concentrate the attention, observation, consciousness of the working class exclusively, or even mainly, upon itself alone are not social democrats. For the self-knowledge of the working class is indissolubly bound up not solely with a fully clear theoretical understanding, or rather not so much with the theoretical as the practical understanding of the relationships between all the various classes of modern society, acquired through the experience of political life. For this reason, the concept of the economic struggle as the most widely applicable means of drawing the masses into the political movement which our economics preach is so extremely harmful and reactionary in its practical significance. So we said a lot here. Let's back up. First of all, social democrats. He's like, look, we are social democrats. Like, what is that? Social democrats. Today we have a party, the Social Democratic Party. There are a few members in the United States legislation who identify as social democrats, like people like Senator Bernie Sanders, or I believe U.S. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Might have butchered that name, but I believe she also identifies as a social democrat. But I mean, that's a very different party, right? Very similar to, we look at Republican Party and Democratic Party here in the United States of America. Very different than like in the 1800s, for instance. They're very different kinds of parties now, right? And that's so social democrats in Russia, like during that time, is quite a different party, but they still share like some similarities in terms of, like, they embrace socialism, but the way to achieve socialism is very different, right? So when we say social democrats, we gotta remember we're talking about the context of Russia back in Lenin's day, right? Which is not the same kind of social democrat political party functioning that we see today. And then we bring up the word economist, and he's talking about how the economists are very harmful because they're preaching this appeal to only focus on the economic oppression. And he's saying that's very short-sighted, and it brings about reactionary and very primitive ways of fighting the system that aren't sustainable. But I'll continue. In order to become a social democrat, the worker must have a clear picture in his mind of the economic nature and the social and political features of the landlord and the priest, the high state official and the peasant, the student and the vagabond. He must know their strong and weak points. He must grasp the meaning of all the catchwords and sophisms by which each class and each stratum camouflages its selfish strivings and its real inner workings. He must understand what interests are reflected by certain institutions and certain laws and how they are reflected. But this clear picture cannot be obtained from any book. It can be obtained only from living examples and from exposures that follow close upon what is going on about us at a given moment, upon what is being discussed in whispers, perhaps by each one in his own way, upon what finds expression in such and such events, in such and such statistics, in such and such court sentences, etc., etc. These comprehensive political exposures are an essential and fundamental condition for training the masses in revolutionary activity. So he's talking about how raising of class consciousness, political education of the masses. So how do you do it? Again, you have to be diverse in your education. You can't just talk about the corporate executive CEO, multi-billionaires, right? They can't limit it to that. You also have to talk about the landlords, you got to talk about the priests, you have to talk about the high state officials, and you got to talk about the peasants, and you got to do it in a way that's not like super highly theoretical, like not just in the books, but you got to like go in the working space and like kind of live it with the people who are working, right? And just like point out these examples, like, look, we're living in this, right? And these priests are doing this, this, and this, and this. These high state officials are doing this, and this is how we feel these things. You can't just be like, well, I read it in this book, so it must be true. No, and so that's what he's basically saying here, Lenin. But I will continue. Why do Russian workers still manifest little revolutionary activity in response to the brutal treatment of the people by the police, the prosecution of religious sects, the flogging of peasants, the outrageous censorship, the torture of soldiers, the persecution of the most innocent cultural undertakings, etc.? It's kind of sad because, as Lenin gained power, he embraced censorship. He used the police to enforce the persecution of people, right? I mean, he did a lot of these things that he's talking against. But, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Anyway, it is because the economic struggle does not stimulate them to this, because such activity does not promise palpable results, because it produces little that is positive. To adopt such an opinion, we repeat, is merely to direct the charge where it does not belong, to blame the working masses for one's own Philistinism or Bernsteinianism. And this is what I'm talking about, the name dropping. Let's just kind of gloss over that. We must blame ourselves, our lagging behind the mass movement, for still being unable to organize sufficiently wide, striking, and rapid exposures of all the shameful outrages. When we do that, and we must and can do it, the most backward worker will understand or will feel the students and religious sects, the peasants, and the authors are being abused and outraged by those same dark forces that are oppressed and crushing him at every step of his life. So he's saying, like, shame on us for not diversifying our message, and shame on us for not getting in there with the working class and experiencing the struggle of the working class together, and in that way being the example of what you want to change, like being the change, right? Now I skip down to the last line of this page. We're on page 43. Many of us as yet do not recognize this as our burden, duty, but trail spontaneously in the wake of the drab everyday struggle in the narrow confines of factory life. So again, he's just repeating what he's saying, which, you know, that's useful to do. Repetition is an excellent educational tool. That's fine, but, you know, I just don't like the whole excessive name dropping, and the ranting can get a little overplayed, I'd say. But the repetition is good, meaning like, you know, they're just fixated on factory life. The current vanguard, the people who are trying to raise class consciousness, the social democrats are saying, like, they go into the factory life, they say, look, the people who own these factories are not treating you right. But it's like, okay, you got to get out of the factory life, you got to get on the other parts of life as well. And you do got to get into the everyday struggles of the multiple facets of life to start to appeal to the masses and start raising the class consciousness. So this is page 48, and this is the 11th line. We shall never be able to develop the political consciousness of the workers to the level of social democratic political consciousness by keeping within a framework of the economic struggle. For that framework is too narrow. That's what we were talking about. I skipped down a line. The basic error that all the economists commit, namely their conviction that it is possible to develop the class political consciousness of the workers from within, so to speak, from their economic struggle, i.e. by making this struggle the exclusive or at least the main starting point, by making it the exclusive or at least the main basis, such a view is radically wrong. Picked by our polemics against them, the economics refuse to ponder deeply over the origins of these disagreements, with the result that we simply cannot understand one another. It is as if we spoke in different tongues. Right? Again, I highlighted that because it's repeating the same argument that we've been bringing up, we've been discussing thus far, but it also gives you this context of there's this infighting between this rising power that's trying to bring about communism, right? And there was a lot of like political disagreement between the vanguards, or the people who would eventually become the vanguard, that would bring about Soviet Russia. One of these disagreements was this fixation on economics only, and it's like, we got talk about all the aspects. Okay, now it's a disagreement between political parties, or within the one political party, the Social Democratic Party, about this approach. I will continue here. Class political consciousness can be brought to the workers only from without. That is, only from outside the economic struggle, from outside the sphere of relations between workers and employers. The sphere from which alone it is possible to obtain this knowledge is the sphere of relationships of all classes and strata to the state and the government. The sphere of the interrelations between all classes. For that reason, the reply to the question as to what must be done to bring political knowledge to the workers cannot be merely the answer with which, in the majority of cases, the practical workers, especially those inclined towards economism, mostly content themselves, namely to go among the workers. To bring political knowledge to the workers, the Social Democrats must go among all classes of the population. They must dispatch units of their army in all directions. Right? So it's not even just the working class. You got to organize amongst the middle class, even the elite class. You have to address them. And you know, you can go further in the diversification, like you can talk about like maybe the religious class, right? Or the corporate class, you know, or the like academia, the economic class, and so forth and so on. You can't just limit yourself to the working class. And he continues, page 50, this is the third paragraph. We must go among all classes of the population as theoreticians, as propagandists, as agitators, and as organizers. None doubts that the theoretical work of social democrats should aim at studying all the specific features of the social and political condition of the various classes, but extremely little is done in this direction. Right? So what is to be done? Like, not what is to be talked about, right? But what is actually to be done. So he's giving that critique too. And this is the third to the last line of page 50. The principal thing, of course, is propaganda and agitation among all strata of the people. Public meetings and rallies which all are free to attend. Open it up to everybody. It's a good concept, right? And Lenin started that way. Right? I just wish, it's too bad he didn't remain in that kind of line of thinking or that line of practice during his authoritarian reign of Russia. A lot less people would have died in that case, but let me not mention all that, but let's continue. This is page 51, third line. We must also find ways and means of calling meetings of representatives of all social classes that desire to listen to a Democrat, for he is no social democrat who forgets in practice that the communists support every revolutionary movement, that we are obliged for that reason to expound and emphasize general democratic tasks before the whole people, without for a moment concealing our socialist convictions. He is no social democrat who forgets in practice his obligation to be ahead of all in raising, accentuating, and solving every general democratic question. So, right, that's another important point. You're supposed to go among all classes, but you never forget that the ultimate goal is communism, right? So Lenin's saying, no, I'm going to get up into the elite class, or like these other classes that aren't necessarily the working class, but I'm still pushing for communism, and that is the ultimate goal. And to not be threatened by the difference of opinion, but to be like so confident in your class consciousness that you're able to organize within these circles and still push for communism. That's what Lenin is talking about. I'm starting here at the end of page 53, the last line. In order to be able to provide the workers with real, comprehensive, and live political knowledge, we must have our own people, social democrats everywhere, among all social strata, and in all positions from which we can learn the inner springs of our state mechanism. Such people are required not only for propaganda and agitation, but in a still larger measure for organization. Is there a basis for activity among all classes of the population? Whoever doubts this lags in his consciousness behind a spontaneous awakening of the masses. And so that's a good point that he's saying. It's like, look, there's some activity that we need to do within the elite class. We can't just be like, we're not going to deal with them. We're only dealing with the working class. He's like if you're thinking like that, then you lack class consciousness, and you need to take a step back and learn, right? And you need to raise your class consciousness. But I skipped down 3 lines. We would be politicians and social democrats in name only, as all too often happens in reality, if we fail to realize that our task is to utilize every manifestation of discontent and to gather and turn to the best account every protest, however small. So I'll read you this last quote that I picked here on page 58. This is the 8th to the last line of the second paragraph. He who sees in these tactics an obscuring of the class consciousness of the proletariat and a compromise with liberalism reveals his utter failure to understand the true significance of the program of the credo and carries out the program de facto, however much he may repudiate it. For by such an approach he drags social democracy towards the economic struggle against employers and the government, and yields to liberalism, abandons the task of actively intervening in every liberal issue and of determining his own social democratic attitude towards this question. Lenin is, saying, look, if you're just fixated on the economics of the situation, right, then really there's no difference between you and the common liberal. And, Marxist Leninists do not consider themselves liberals, right? They're like, well, no, those damn liberals, which is funny because people who are not familiar with Marxists or Marxist Leninists, and then they're like, oh, they're just these crazy liberals. They're on the left. It's funny how, but actual Marxist Leninists, they don't see themselves as liberals. They see liberalism as part of the problem, right? And one of the problems they see with liberalism is the hyperfixation on the economics and very little thought or appeal to other aspects of life where people are being discriminated against or oppressed or exploited, right? Which is what, you know, we talked about with all those other areas of life. And so he's saying, look, if you want to be part of the vanguard, like if you want to be a true social democrat, you got to get out of that economism, is what he said, this hyperfixation only on one specific aspect of raising the working class up, right? There's all these other things you need to be concerned with too. But you have to do that not only within the working class, but within all classes of society, like even the elite class. So you got to go into the elite class and be like, look, this is the communist way of doing things, and we got the working class, they got our back because we're cool like that, right? We know their struggles because we lived it, and it's time for you to go, type of like that. That's the whole idea. So in my opinion, there's definitely like several good ideas in this text and in Lenin's thought. You know, the issue is just because there's, you know, some good ideas doesn't necessarily mean the whole thing is good, right? And unfortunately, I would say the way he ruled, or the way he governed, or, you know, manifested his rule as an authoritarian, created a whole other bag of worms, and a lot of like exploitation and a lot of harm was caused just by the way these ideas were implemented and enforced. You know, it's just crazy how you can have some good ideas, but if you the way you enforce those ideas can be wrong, and they can also mess people up. So it isn't really enough just to have good ideas. You got to be able to implement those good ideas in constructive ways. And I think Lenin failed to do that, which is why I don't really consider myself a Marxist-Leninist. Now, you know, there are many Marxist-Leninists who will say like, well, you know, I don't really vibe with the way he ruled, but I do vibe with his ideas. And you know, it's kind of hard for me to separate the ideas from the implementation of the ideas, right? And you know, I think it's very important to really talk about like the implementation of those ideas and really consider how these ideas, when implemented in certain ways, can really fuck up society as well, right? Which oftentimes I see Marxist-Leninists dodging that discussion, or like not really wanting to go there, which makes it hard for me to like vibe with that political philosophy. There's also a lot of bad ideas in the text as well, which I don't really want to delve too deeply in, because it's kind of, you know, it's not hard to find videos that like focus a lot on that. What I, you know, much rather do is talk about, you know, some of the ideas that were constructive, or that were, you know, good, and you know, discuss ways that we can implement those ideas in ways that can benefit society. I don't think it's very useful to just kind of wholesale throw out Lenin and his ideas completely and be like, you know, I'm just not even going to read anything he wrote, and yeah, you know, everything that he said was complete trash. You know, that's not as useful either. You really do have to not take what he said with a grain of salt. You know, that's an overplayed statement, and I wouldn't say that, but really think critically and really like avoid the hero worship that a lot of Marxist-Leninists will kind of get trapped into. Anyway, I'm more like rambling now. Check it out. It's online for free, if you will. I would encourage you to, you know, maybe read a little bit of Lenin, just so you can be part of the discussion, and you know, you can kind of have a more solid foundation of what is being discussed when people debate about like capitalism versus communism, and you know, capitalism sucks or communism sucks and socialism is the work of the devil, and you know, all these back and forth arguments that kind of just go nowhere and just more or less become shouting matches and just personal attacks against each other. Hey, Lenin did that shit himself, right? You can read all about that in this work in particular. But I think if we really sit down and think about the actual like political, philosophical ideas in critical ways, we could actually start to develop useful modes of being in our society. But that's just me. That's just me. I would like to thank you for watching the Black Ponderer. Tune in next time for more philosophical thought.